Bill.
Hello, Matt. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be back. I miss you. It's like the first time we've gone 2 weeks without talking. It's kind of weird.
I imagine you were preoccupied enough with the second bundle that I perhaps was not so much on top of your mind over the last 2 weeks.
I thought about you every minute of the day. Every day. No, it is good. We're happy to welcome our second son, Becket Wilberforce Lewis, named after two heroic figures. And
now, I don't know if everyone knows I didn't know actually Becket or Wilberforce until you mentioned them to me, and I went and Googled them. So, what is the historical significance of these two names to the?
I'm thinking of writing a piece about them and some other lesser known people that I think are really great. So, with the name Matt Lewis and being a writer, it's kind of problematic. So there's a lot of Matt Lewises. There's an Elvis impersonator named Matt Lewis. There's a Neville Longbottom from Harry Potter is named Matt Lewis. So it's a daily fight to win the Matt Lewis Google war. And I do not want to put that on my kids. So I always thought if I had kids, I would want to name them something kind of weird. But I would have settled for Rivers Lewis or something. It was my wife who insisted that we name our children after great heroic people. So we had a lot of debate over this, and that we're sort of stuck on the B's, Burke and Beckett now, the first two, and I think it's going to be like the Kardashians. Everybody with a K name would be the B's. But Thomas Becket, not Samuel Beckett, Thomas Becket with one T is our son's name, Becket. He was the Archbishop of Canterbury who had been a friend of the King of England. They had been buddies. There's a movie called Becket that you can see. It came out in 1964. But once he basically became a priest and was responsible for the church, he would no longer do the king's bidding. And he stood up defending religious freedom against the king and ended up being martyred for that. So he is a martyr. William Wilberforce is actually arguably my biggest political statesman hero. The only reason my son's name isn't Wilberforce is I didn't want him to be called Wilbur.
Force.
But it could have been Will or Force. His name was William Wilberforce. But William Wilberforce was a contemporary of Edmund Burke. So he was a British statesman, like in the 19th century, and he led the fight to abolish first the slave trade and then later slavery in the empire in Great Britain. So Wilberforce is a great movie I want to highly recommend, called Amazing Grace, which is about William Wilberforce. And he's somebody that I think conservatives and liberals can both identify with. A lot of conservatives, a lot of pro-life conservatives see themselves sort of as modern-day William Wilberforce. As he stood up against this evil institution of slavery when that was an unpopular stand. And that's the analogy there. But he was also like an animal rights activist, for the day at least. And he was a Christian convert, and the guy who wrote the song, the hymn, Amazing Grace, had been a slave boat captain. And as the story goes, once Wilberforce became a Christian, he wanted to leave politics because he thought that, it's what we think about politics today. And that's the guy who wrote Amazing Grace talked him out of that and said, no, you can serve this purpose in Parliament. And of course, he ended up leading the charge to abolish the slave trade. So a great man, and we can hope, it's big shoes to fill for my son, but I hope that he can rise to the occasion.
Now, I'm surprised that your wife insisted upon heroic, historic names, because I tried that play with my wife, and she absolutely did not want that. She thought it was too much of a burden to put on a child to give them a name of somebody of an historic great. I was making a push. We had a boy to go with Thurgood, and I was looking up names of suffragettes, for girls, and she waved me off. But I at least got Ray as a middle name, which is French for truth, and that's sort of my other interest was just like sort of like one of those old style Puritan names that at least speaks to some sort of great quality. And she gave me a French version for a middle name, so I got that far.
I should probably correct. I think I said I think probably more of an 18th century than 19th century, but I'm sleep deprived. Let me just put that out there now. So anything I said.
Imagine. When I had our second, I ended up spending a lot more time with my first.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much ever since, because there's so much. We were breastfeeding, so she's obviously very. She's attached to the baby much more, and so I got to pick up the slack. Are you finding that your roles are shifting now?
That's exactly the model, Bill. That's exactly the model. And look, I've never had twins. Everybody says having twins is so hard, and I suppose it is, especially for the mom. But I got to tell you, if you have twins, if they're babies, you can sit them down and they stay there. But you can't sit a 2-year-old down. So we've got a newborn and this 2-year-old who wants to come up and pat him on the head, pretty hard, and wants to play with my guitar, and will go up the stairs when he shouldn't. So it is interesting, and I found myself the slack that I'm picking up is mostly with the toddler. Obviously I'm doing a little bit with both, but
right.
But mostly I would say that yes, that's true. Going back to the name. I was just going to say, going back.
I was give you a word of caution that what happened with us was that my oldest is now much more attached to me and is more dismissive to her mom than before, and so that. Well,
complicating matters is the fact that Burke, the older son, looks a lot like me, and everyone says, and I know that the looks change, but everyone says that Becket, the baby, looks like my wife. So we could potentially have this problem where Burke, the older, is attached to me for a variety of reasons. So we'll see how it shakes out. It's weird for me, Bill. I'm an only child. So this is the biggest family I've ever been a part of. I mean, and it's so weird. My mom had 11 brothers and sisters. My dad had 9, but I was an only child. So for me, this is weird. And I tell you what it's like. It's like my wife and I were already juggling a couple of balls, and someone has just thrown like another one in. That's really the analogy that I would use. But
well, you're now tied with me.
Yes.
We're parity with our breeding. And the conservative movement seems to have a demographic problem with winning national elections. So, do you need to step it up and not do this modern suburban 2-child thing if the conservatives are going to find a way back?
We're going to beat the left one way or another.
Despite the fact that you are dealing with a new child, you literally coined the phrase that is dominating the conservative discussions right now, that the party and the movement needs to modernize and not moderate.
Yes, I don't think I've gotten props for that to the degree.
I'm giving you the props.
I think I should. You're giving me props.
You literally did this, I think, just a couple days after the election. I think we talked about it a little bit when we talked last, but now that this discussion has been evolving over the past several days, is there a better sense now, what that means exactly? I mean, obviously there's probably more than one way to interpret it, but are there different camps forming? Which is the best way to modernize that does not betray conservative principles?
So, I mean, yeah, it's a huge debate, and there are different people who have different takes on it. I've written a lot about this because it's something I've given a lot of thought to. I wrote a piece back in September for The Guardian saying that this had to happen, that there was, that the conservative movement and the Republican Party needed to reinvention. And again, it's not becoming more moderate. In some cases, you should become more conservative. but it's actually just kind of, I hate to say rethinking. I think maybe just thinking through some things. And then a lot of things that were handed down that we've sort of assumptions and presumptions that conservatives kind of take for granted, without really stopping to think like, is that even conservative? Is it right? Has the situation changed? And I think it's time for some introspection. But I will say, I think that the interesting thing happening right now appears to be, for this moment at least, it appears to be that you have young conservatives who are fairly well regarded by the conservative movement, like Marco Rubio and Bobby Jindal, stepping up and kind of putting others in their place. And as you know, I've liked Rush Limbaugh for many years, but he's been on the air for 25 years. It's a long time. And you saw a little bit where it seemed like Bobby Jindal was sort of pushing back on some of what Limbaugh was saying, and frankly, some of what Romney had said, basically about how Obama had bought off the American public. I thought that was a very pernicious idea that Romney was putting out there as an excuse for losing. And I'm hopeful that because of their credibility within the conservative movement, that Jindal and Rubio are able to craft what I call, modernization, not moderation, and be cosmopolitan conservatives who can simultaneously, be considered serious by mainstream writers, but also not sell out conservative ideas or values, and also reach, sell sort of a populist argument too. So it's difficult. There are many. Speaking of juggling, with what I'm doing with my family, juggling is happening in the political family of the Republican Party as well.
Now, as you know, Matt, I tried to help. I submitted a piece to your publication, The Daily Caller, which they graciously put up on the site, saying to
really good piece. Yeah, really good piece.
Thank you very much. And sort of looking back, it's been 20 plus years since Democrats were at rock bottom following the defeats of Carter, Mondale, and Dukakis, and now I think you can fairly argue that Obama is the most liberal president we've had since Lyndon Johnson, if not FDR. And so what happened in that 20-year span? Well, it started with Bill Clinton cutting some losses and saying, look, let's get over our absolutist opposition to the death penalty. Let's say we're going to end welfare as we know it. And then following actually his attempt to do a liberal Brady bill, gun control measure, Democrats since then have essentially said, forget additional gun control. I think those three issues have remained on the shelf. There are other things that Clinton did rhetorically or even substantively. For example, he said abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. That was kind of a recalibration of tone. He said the era of big government is over after the midterm loss of 94. And actually, it's similar things in the 92 campaign, just wasn't quite as pointed. But those kinds of rhetorical recalibrations did not stick as much as there was a case. You could argue maybe there was some overcompensation there, and Obama said, "Look, I don't have to stick to that. I can do the Recovery Act. I can defend abortion rights broadly in 2012, and we'll be okay. But welfare, death penalty, gun control, I think those issues have essentially remained on the shelf. And even though these things stick in the craw of a lot of liberals to this day, they haven't divided the party at the end of the day. They haven't prevented other major liberal advances from happening. So the point is that not every strategic retreat amounts to a slippery slope into the abyss of triangulation or abandonment of fundamental principles. So I guess my question to you is there a sense on the right now, we can make a strategic retreat on immigration. We can accept some tax increase as part of a grander deficit deal. It doesn't mean that we are against low taxes forevermore. We can accept climate science and still believe that regulation should be as minimal as possible. Is there any kind of sense that people are willing to make some, I would argue, not that big changes, but seem to be big in the minds of some conservatives.
Yes, Bill. First of all, let me say I really liked your piece at the Daily Caller, and the thing I liked about it, it was sincere advice. I mean, a lot of times liberals give conservatives advice, but you wouldn't want to take it because they have ulterior motives. You were offering sincere advice, sort of comparing what...
I don't like advice that is never going to get taken. Republicans should embrace abortion. Like, that's not going to happen, so I'm not going to give you advice. That's
and then ridiculous. I would say, nor should they. I mean, I think that... I am pro-life, but putting that aside, I mean, I think that 50% of the country at least is pro-life, and there's a huge constituency. So even from a business standpoint, putting aside the obviously important issue, it wouldn't make a lot of sense. But look, I think that there are a couple things at play there, Bill. I mean, first, the point you're making is what, and I think this is part of the introspection that the party needs to do. What are your deal breakers? What do you really care about? What is you have to pick your values, and I mean in the literal sense. What things do you value? What things define the party and the movement, and what things are really secondary to it? And then also things change. I mean, I've written, some of the things that we call conservative aren't necessarily. I mean, I think the Republican Party has been tagged with this image of being anti-immigrant. But as I've written before, immigration is, and this isn't original to me, but it's the most entrepreneurial act you can do. I mean, deciding to move your family to another country for a better life, that's tough, and that makes you a pretty good rugged individualist, if you ask me. We have to respect the rule of law, but I've even thought of it this way, Bill. Who do you want in America? Do you want the guy who stands in a bureaucratic line and fills out paperwork, or do you want the guy who takes it upon himself to cross the Rio Grande? I mean, I'm not sure. We have to respect the rule of law. So, but having said that, I mean, talk about a can-do attitude. So there are a lot of conservative arguments for increased Hispanic immigration. So I think that you're going to see some movement there. I mean, I think that there's nothing patently unconservative about it, other than to say that I think that conservatives value tradition and would want to have new immigrants become Americans. And so to me, that's really where the battle is. It's not stopping immigration. We should certainly secure our borders, but I'd like to see a lot more immigration. And I think that Rubio's version of the DREAM Act is certainly reasonable, a humanitarian issue at this point. People who are brought here through no fault of their own, who want to join the military or go to college. I want them in America. And they're willing to fight our wars or, become engineers or whatever. We need them. We need young people. I mean,
You're making even more substantive and high-minded argument than even I was suggesting. You're making a case that to be pro-immigrant is to be conservative. That's
look, yeah, I mean, look, here's what Israel does, by the way. Israel, I just read this really good book, Startup Nation. And one of the things Israel does is it encourages. You run for parliament saying, I will bring in 1 million new immigrants. But they send you to this six-month Hebrew immersion class where you get paid a stipend to attend. Now,
big government.
It is, but it's one of the things that they value as a society and a government. It's integrating new immigrants into their society and into their culture. Now, obviously, we can envision a scenario where it becomes like propaganda, and bureaucrats are turning immigrants into little liberals or something. But it does seem like a pretty good idea if you want new immigrants to speak English and to understand history and the culture. So I think is it why aren't we doing something like that? Why isn't the Republican Party and the conservative movement supporting that? And by the way, and then I'll shut up, Bill. This should be a liberal position. It should be labor unions who want to keep out workers. This is not a free market conservative, social compassionate conservative issue. This is something that populist liberals and union workers should be the ones who are anti-immigrant, in my opinion.
Back in history they have been, but that's been changing. I think for a while, immigration has always cut across ideological and party lines, and for a long time, a lot of labor unions were not that big on pro-immigration policies. They thought they'd be competing for jobs. They're hurting their memberships. Now it's sort of akin to what's going on in Israel. They want people. They want more members. Their numbers are down. So you're definitely seeing a shift amongst labor unions.
And never mind
policies.
And never mind labor union workers. We need more people. We have all of these baby boomers who are retiring, and they will start collecting socials. And there needs to be young workers who are legal, because that way they can pay, taxes and everything and support them. Well, it's not going to happen with, Anglos having 1.2 kids, right?
Well, and this is sort of the big academic question that gets debated a lot. Does an immigrant take something from America and it becomes a zero-sum game where you have more people and less resources to go around? Or is there a growth aspect to immigrant? Is there a multiplier effect when you're bringing an influx of people? Are they creating more needs for productivity, for new products and services and whatnot, and that grows the pie? You certainly want to. I think it's better to think about it in those terms, and at least try to construct policies that allow for such growth to occur. And so long as you can prove that, it's gonna I think wash away a lot of the more short-sighted myopic arguments that you've seen on both sides over the past several decades.
There's also an interesting argument. I had this guy on. I'm trying to think of his name. He wrote the book "Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids," and he was on my podcast a couple years ago, and he said that. That countries that are homogeneous are more likely to become socialist. If you look at some of these Eastern European countries, there isn't diversity. And everybody looks alike. And if everybody's like you say, oh, well, he wouldn't cheat the system. Let's give him more welfare. But countries that have diversity don't have as much social capital, which you might argue is a bad thing in terms of building community. But because of that, they are much more hesitant to become socialist and liberal. And so there is this counterintuitive argument that more immigrants equals more conservative. Look, the problem is right now that the Republican Party, by allowing this image that they are anti-immigrant to kind of promulgate, has created a very bad situation now where more immigrants almost by definition equals electoral losses, at least in the short term. So it's so bad that this happened. Would Romney lose like 72% of Hispanics? And not only Hispanics, Romney lost by a huge margin Asian Americans.
Right.
It's
insane. They're a smaller part of the population, but
it's insanity. And here's my point, Bill. I am not making a point based on electoral reasons. Like, I'm not going to say, well, we've given up, we finally have to. No, I don't care about short-term things like elections. My thing is, if conservatism isn't a compelling enough idea to win over the hearts and minds and souls of all Americans and of immigrants, then pack it up. That's the problem.
You need a Yakov Smirnoff agenda. Back in the 80s, when all the immigrants that came over were all flag waving, Reagan loving,
what the country, what the country, yeah, exactly. I'm Yakov.
He's still kicking in Branson,
I think, Branson, you can make a lot of money in Branson. I think once this, I think eventually, Bill, you and I might end up in Branson doing this, doing our little horse and pony show in Branson. You could have a nice life in Branson.
Hey, it's a swing state.
We'll come into Dollywood, put up a couple stools on like a Wednesday night, and talk politics. It's a good lifestyle. We'll retire there. Because I don't want to go on the road, so we can just Vegas or Branson.
It's either Vegas or Branson or Pigeon Forge. Now you're making the argument that more immigrants can mean more conservatism and less welfare and less socialism. I've been entertaining myself in the past several weeks listening to a lot of Rush Limbaugh and Glenn Beck, and that's not their message. They are really buying into I think this America is in decline. This very sort of gloom and doom attitude that this is not your father's America. We have this new generation and all these immigrants, and the country's changing, and they're takers, not makers, and you can't beat Santa Claus. So what do we do with ourselves? And I mean, I felt in the Bush years there was definitely an America is in decline attitude on the left in certain strains that all is lost, nothing we can do. They're going to drive us into the abyss, and we can't stop it. Now I feel the same is coming from this corner of the right, and Rush in particular is getting very defensive because he feels like all of the establishment poobahs are out to diminish him and blame him for the loss, and so he's trying to save himself and his reputation. But I don't feel like he's giving much of a map for what you do about the situation. He's just mired in the sense of we're in decline, Democrats are winning on decline. And people won't wake up, and I don't understand why we can't wake them up.
So yes, this has been an interesting argument, and it obviously speaks to Mitt Romney's comments on that conference call. And my take is that first of all, it's patently un-Reagan. It's the opposite of what Reagan believed or thought or would have said. It seems defeatist. It seems, to me, conservatism and rugged individualism is, that the Marines adapt and overcome. And it's not, think of it as an individual, right? If the government tells you you can't succeed because the man's keeping you down, well, that has a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think this notion that the Republican Party can't win is bullshit. And not only is it bullshit, I think it's actually harmful because what needs to happen is this is a marketplace of ideas, and parties exist to serve people. It's not the other way around. And the Republican Party needs to find a way to sell themselves as a party that's the best for all Americans. And I don't buy this thing that people are being bought off. Now, some people are, and some people always have been. But are you telling me, I know you're not, Bill, but are they telling me that Asian Americans voted for Obama in large margins because they wanted handouts? Doesn't seem plausible to me. So, if you don't win, it's because you didn't deserve to win. Churchill says deserve victory. I mean, the Republican Party and conservative movement needs to deserve victory. They need to craft a compelling, and by the way, they need to give the voters something. Now, it's not cell phones and it's not money, but they need to give them hope, give them inspiration, give them a better life for their kids. Yes, so we do need to give them something. The conservative movement does need to give them something, and we didn't, and we haven't been. And so that's kind of fundamentally the problem. And the problem is this is a liberal defeatist mentality. You can't get ahead. We can't win. It's problematic, and I hope that it's just a short-term thing. But it gives people, it's a cop-out. It gives people an excuse for losing. It's a rationalization for why you lost. Put your big boy pants on and go out there and win. Win one for the giver.
Maybe you should write a book called Wait to Move to Canada.
Well, I would pitch that book idea. I pitched a book idea a year ago, Bill, that Romney would probably lose, and that conservatives would need to be reevaluating, and that they should modernize and not moderate. By the way, a line that has now been used by many people, including Bobby Jindal and Kathy McMorris-Rodgers. And no, not interested. No one would believe that. Anyway. My experience with book publishers and agents is It's very frustrating, though.
I sympathize. Now, one person who's giving a shot of hope seems to be Senator Marco Rubio, someone whose stock seems to have bounced up and down a lot over the course of the past year. But now he's back up and getting, he went out to Iowa. He's getting national interviews. He's being looked at for how do we solve this Latino problem? Essentially, I think is the subtext to a lot of the attention. When I talked to Kristen Soltis on the DMZ last week, she seemed to caution. She's all for modernizing on immigration. I think you guys are in the same space substantively, but that you can't just sort of tokenize the problem and just sort of throw up a Latino face out there and assume that solves everything. That there's some deeper issues to address. But do you think that Rubio is at least part of the solution, or can be part of the solution?
I mean, absolutely. I think that Rubio is the front runner for the nomination for the presidency, and I think
not Chris Christie.
What's that?
Not Chris Christie.
One more time, Bill.
Chris Christie is not the front runner.
Oh no, Chris Christie hoisted on his own petard. No, I think Rubio, and everybody says Hispanic. That's just like the icing on the cake. He's young, he's smart, and he is a compelling. He can talk about old school rap. He can talk about new school rap. He can talk about rather than talk about the haves versus the have-nots and get into the weeds and talk about austerity and all of these negative things. Rubio talks about this big vision about how America is a nation of immigrants, and what makes America great is that you can move here. And because you have freedom and because of the free market and free enterprise, you can work your way into the middle class. You can have a son. You can start off as a bartender in Little Havana, and your son can become a U.S. senator, and that's part of the American dream. And it's damn inspiring, Bill. And he talks about these big visionary ideas all the time. And I think in a way that no one, and we talk about Reagan all the time, and people get sick of hearing it, but I really think he is the most visionary and inspiring in terms of his rhetoric since Reagan, and so I think that he can be very very helpful during this transition period, because I think he's generally trusted and liked by real conservatives, but I also think he has the intelligence and credibility to be taken seriously by mainstream as well. Now, there is this mini gaffe. I hate to even call it a gaffe, but during that GQ interview, and I saw this coming, Bill, because he had talked. I was watching him in Iowa at the Terry Branstad birthday fundraiser, and he talked about how something to the effect of in the 6,000 years of recorded human history. And when I heard him say that, I think it's part of his stump speech. I knew that the secular liberals would seize on that 6,000 years and accuse him of believing in a young Earth. And sure enough, and I don't know when this GQ interview, if it happened before or after the Iowa speech, but GQ asked him about this, and he said, hey, I'm not a scientist, man, and kind of brushed off the question, and now he's being mocked and derided as being anti-science and all that. Now, of course, when Barack Obama said that when life begins is above his pay grade, that wasn't a problem. This is a problem for Rubio because of the ongoing narrative of a war on science, and because part of Rubio's stock has always been that he can bridge this gap between being kind of a serious cosmopolitan conservative, but also being accepted by the Tea Party wing of the movement. And not to say that they're unserious, but that he was sort of this bridge, this fusionist candidate So this is a little bit concerning. Clearly, I think it's an attempt by the left and the MSM to take him out. I mean, they saw Sarah Palin as an existential threat, but they have to see Rubio the same way. But he should have been better at answering this question. And as I've written extensively, and I have a new column up at The Week on this bill, there is nothing inconsistent about believing that the Earth is 1 billion years old, and that God exists, and that miracles exist, and that Jesus is Lord. I mean, there's nothing inconsistent about those things. They're not mutually exclusive.
Well, why? I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you at all, but why can't you just say that?
Well, I think he should have said it. I mean, I think he was taken by surprise, and I think that conservatives need to find a way to say this. Interestingly, there was a debate in 2008, a Republican debate, which was quite silly because you were asked to raise your hands if you believed in evolution. And it's such a simplistic question. And I thought John McCain had a pretty good answer where he said, I believe in evolution, but when I hike I forget what it was, not the Appalachian Trail, thank goodness, but, when I see
Canyon, perhaps?
It was something like, when I see the sunrise and the beauty of the earth, I can't help but also know that God's hand was in its creation. And, there is nothing inconsistent about believing that, and I'm not saying that this is fact either. You can believe what you want, but there are plenty of theologians who have absolutely no problem. And I'm not talking about these phony theologians who don't believe in the divinity, don't believe in miracles, any of that. I'm talking about legitimate theologians, true believers who believe that God may have used evolution, that it was a tool of God. So you can be sort of a creationist and an evolutionist at the same time. They're not inconsistent. Whatever it is, conservatives need to do a better job of being able to explain this or talk about it. Much better than I just have, by the way. But read my column. I did a better job at The Week.
If every Republican was saying what you're saying, this wouldn't be an issue for them. I mean, I think it's a very plain-spoken, obvious answer to the question. If you're coming from a religious perspective, it's showing that science and religion are not incompatible, and it's only when folks have suggested that they're in inherent conflict, like when you have political problems,
right? And that's the problematic part is that we've created, and it's not just conservatives; it's the media and liberals. We've created this false dichotomy, which says you either believe in science or you believe in God, but you can't do both. And that's simply not the case. There's a pastor from Christ Redeemer Church, Tim Keller, who's quite prominent. And I write about him in this column in The Week, where he says that in the Bible, what people have done is sort of take the Bible where it says, and so-and-so begat so-and-so, and he begat so-and-so, and he begat so-and-so, and they add it up, and it equals 6,000 years. And that's sort of, they've extrapolated from that. But what he says is that when it says you begat somebody, it doesn't mean that you're their father. It means that you're their ancestor. So that's part of the reasoning there. But no, look, here's the thing, Bill. I believe that in the old days it was possible to not. Talking about this stuff is sensitive, and it's like talking to your kids about sex. Nobody wants to do it. And in the old days, you could get away with this. But now I think that if you are a conservative, you have to think through these difficult issues. And it doesn't mean you have to dwell on it. I mean, I think if Rubio had found a more eloquent way to say what I just said, in a very short manner, he could have said it and then moved on, sort of dismissed it and moved on, rather than it now becoming this big, 1 or 2 day story where people were writing bad things about him and saying that he's anti-science or whatnot. I think it's important for people to know that you can, I respect your faith. If you believe in a young Earth, I respect that. But I also think that Christians ought to know that there is no daylight between science and God.
I mean, I think these have become sort of bars to clear for Republican politicians, again, going back to, the late 80s and early 90s, Democrats begin to have bars, sort of values bars to clear. Show me something that says that your value system is not so out of step with the mainstream. I know you're in the mainstream, and therefore then I'll hear you out on everything else. That's why Clinton had to cut losses on death penalty and welfare. I mean, it's unfortunate from my perspective, but the evidence shows that once he did that, he could make an economic populist argument and get a hearing. Whereas Dukakis was doing very well for himself in the summer of '88, and it was only when he got slammed with a barrage of attacks on his social value system, they didn't really step up to and explain that. A perception solidified that to be a liberal is to be out of step with America.
Right.
And I think now you're seeing that on the right now. When you have Murdochs and Aikens saying stuff about rape that just seems out of step with America, maybe some unfair bars have been set in the public mindset that, life isn't fair all the time.
Right.
Maybe your belief on science and creationism is totally irrelevant to the job of being president or being senator. Too bad. You got to figure out a way to clear it now to show, what, I'm not like that. I'm like this. Hear me on the rest of my agenda.
I think you're right. We need to find a way to explain conservatism in the modern era. And this doesn't mean that we abandon all the things that we believe in. Far from it. It's finding a way to make it relevant in the 21st century and to a diverse audience. And it has to be done. And if you believe in conservatism and you want it to survive, and it's a honorable, fine, I think, salutary political philosophy, then that's what you ought to be thinking about. But look, I've thought these things through, and partially because I used to go on MSNBC and stuff and debate liberals, and so I had to think through what are they going to say? Can I prove my point? And I think, unfortunately, a lot of politicians and others haven't, whether it's epistemic closure or whatnot, they haven't subjected themselves to testing their beliefs and their ideas. And that's unfortunate. Before you run for office, especially, you should do it. Bill, I got hammered yesterday by Fishbowl DC, my friends at Fishbowl DC, for something I wrote at the Week, a different column I wrote at the Week, where I advocated that the way to fix this is compassionate conservatism. Now, the problem is I didn't write the headline or the subheadline, and those things alluded to Bush. I was not recommending a return to Bushism. Far from that. But what I am saying is that if you look at what happened in 2012, it was a fusion of the worst aspects of conservatism, right? So you had the libertarian strain, the worst aspects of it, not the best, the worst, saying, 47%, and you didn't build that and all that. Very divisive, if you're not an entrepreneur, you don't matter, Randian sort of. And then you had the worst aspects of social conservatism, talking about the body shuts that down, rape, all those things. And I'm saying, rather than highlighting the worst aspects of libertarianism and social conservatism, let's highlight the best. Defending unborn life, providing opportunity for people to be successful. I mean, these are honorable, fine traditions that I firmly believe make everybody better. They're good for Americans, good for everybody. That's how they does. And so, to me, it's about compassion, compassionate conservatism, not Bush compassionate conservatism. And that's the problem. The brand has been so tainted. But I can't find another way to say it. Whatever it is, if you're talking about gay marriage, what's the compassionate? What's the right? Do the right thing. What is the right thing? Doesn't mean you have to believe in it. Doesn't mean you have to support it. But don't hate them. If you're talking about immigration, especially young people who are brought here through no fault of their own, what would a Christian do? What would a compassionate person do? Would they build a moat? A friggin' moat around the country, as Herman Cain said we ought to do? So that was my point. And, I was crucified for using the term that Bush really destroyed by making it about... What
you're saying was to show that conservatism is compassionate, not that there's sort of a special brand of conservatism.
Right. Well, here's the thing.
That should be siphoned off of the rest of conservatism.
Here's the point. The 2012 Republican motto could have been uncompassionate conservatism. I'm just saying don't do that. So to me, that's just part of, evil slogan, don't be evil. I mean, maybe that has to be the first step.
Well, I know you only got a few minutes left. I only got a few minutes left. And I know that what's going on with Susan Rice and Libya is still on your mind. There's all sorts of hot topics. It was a very eventful post-election time with all the deficit talks going on, violence in Israel and Palestine, Obama's trip to Asia, and Libya is still hot. It seems to me that I don't know if Obama is going to nominate Susan Rice or not. I don't know if his defense of her was a precursor to a nomination or to make sure she does not get nominated with a sense of dignity to her reputation and not have a sense of dishonor to linger in the ether. But certainly Obama has elevated the dispute over her comments by his remarks. And it seems to me that even though there are folks on the right still criticizing her and questioning her credibility, it doesn't seem to be rising to the level of filibuster worthy. Even McCain and Graham are stopping themselves short of that, which makes me think that Obama might well nominate her to show that you can't push him around if they don't have the numbers to say they'd have a fight about it. Do you think that it makes sense for Republicans to focus their fire on her even after Romney's attempts to make this an issue backfired?
It may not be the best political move, and I suspect that Obama will nominate her trying to set up a situation where old white men like John McCain go after a younger woman of color, as Joe Scarborough called her all morning this morning, and sort of reinforce this divisive narrative. But I have to say, I think that it's the right thing to do to oppose her nomination because, Bill, she's either utterly incompetent, which I don't believe, or she went on national television and knowingly misled the American public. Now, I don't think that means we have to kick her off of her perch as ambassador, but why would you promote her to Secretary of State when it's quite obvious, and it wasn't the moment. I knew the moment, and everyone knew when she went on those, all those Sunday shows in September, that she was misleading the public. By the way, about a pretty important topic, the death of 4 Americans, including a U.S. ambassador, saying, that it was spontaneous, that, that it wasn't terrorism, that it was about some stupid video. So, look, I'm not saying that we need to destroy her, but I just don't think that coming on the heels of, knowingly misleading the American public, you should be promoted Secretary of State. So I think it may not be politically smart, but I think it is the right thing to do to oppose her nomination.
Well, I don't know if she does get nominated. I mean, this is the thing I feel like, when Romney tried to press this point in the debate, he didn't have his facts quite right, and then he got embarrassed by it and then dropped the whole line of argument. It seems to me that if once you dig deeper into this whole discussion, what was she always had caveats in her remarks. She never was being flatly definitive. But the one piece that was not quite right was whether it was from a spontaneous demonstration or a planned attack. But it was never outright dismissed that there are any militants or Al-Qaeda operatives involved. And the video aspect of it, there's still evidence that it was about a video. That the New York Times reported from their on-the-ground reporting in Libya that there was local militants, that they hastily prepared attack because of the video. So it's not this either-or that a lot of the right has been making. Now, maybe you want to dispute that reporting or whatnot still, but it seems like it's not that slam dunk a case and that you want to elevate into a grand battle royale for a nomination fight. When it's risen to that level, very recently it hasn't worked out. So I know you feel very strongly about it, but it seems to me it's not that clear cut that she deliberately misled or even unintentionally misled, because the crux of what she was saying was not all that off the mark and not fundamentally misleading about what actually happened there.
We're gonna have to leave it there, Bill. Until,
but I gotta say, I am very intrigued by the possibility that he would nominate her because there's so many chips on the deficit talks. I mean, that really is a very make or break moment for Obama as far as what he can accomplish substantively, how his power dynamic between him and the Congress are going to be. If he gets rolled on that, it really cripples his ability to govern for the next 4 years. And it would be, and just by nature, it would be some sort of political risk to put a hot nomination on the griddle before that's done. And so the fact that he seems very defiant about it is at minimum interesting. It's that you take that kind of if he's going to take that kind of a chance. I don't know if Hillary would even step down before December 31st, but it's interesting that he certainly feels pretty aggressive post-election, which is not unusual for a second-term president, but sometimes sometimes that gets you burned, as it was with Bush and Social Security and FDR with court packing. So we'll see how he's able to juggle it all.
Indeed, we will.
Great to have you back. Congrats on your increased brood. I'm glad you could match me. We'll see who can. If one of us can outdo the other still, I think I might be done. I can finish. So you got an opening here to outbreed me.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. Until next time.
Until next time. Well, and have a good Thanksgiving.
You too, man.
You
too.
And we'll see you next week.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.